good morning to you in St. Lucia and across the entire Eastern Caribbean listening to this broadcast, wherever you may be. On Tuesday, April 26, St. Lucians were presented with a budget for 2022-23 by Prime Minister and Minister of Finance Philip J. Pierre. It was a policy statement with a body, heart and soul. The Finance Minister did not disappoint. In this budget, the Minister of Finance was given the responsibility of creating a new kind of economy, try new methods and schemes never tried before. It is a policy statement that empowers others through a process of social economic influence, which maximizes the efforts of others towards the achievement of a greater good. It is a policy statement presented against the backdrop of an ongoing pandemic and a war in Europe. It was the most anticipated address in recent times. It is a policy statement prepared for St. Lucians, by St. Lucians, reminiscent of the days of George Girard, Norman Etienne, Zenith James, Osbert Doven, Cletus Springer, and Sir Dwight Venner, to name a few. Long before St. Lucians had been introduced or knew anything of Ernst and Young, and that's an easily verified tourism. In this policy statement, the Prime Minister took measures to cushion the impact of rising fuel and food prices affecting our people, to assist those venturing into new businesses or expansion of their businesses. The Prime Minister said, and the Minister of Finance said, since assuming office in July of 2021, actions have been consistent with the core philosophy of his party of putting people first in administering the affairs of this country. He said in formulating this budget, he placed great emphasis on addressing the immediate and pressing needs of most St. Lucians. He outlined some policy measures to bring immediate relief to individuals, households, companies. Here are some of the measures that the Prime Minister has introduced, the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. 1. Subsidizing cooking gas. 2. Increasing the annual personal tax allowance from 18,000 to 25,000. Cushioning consumers from the full impact of rising fuel prices. Reducing the personal income tax, prioritizing the payment of tax refunds to taxpayers, waiving interest and penalty charges on personal and company home taxes. The Speaker has arrived in the chamber, and we'll start with prayers and the debate.
Let us pray.
We'll start in a while.
Almighty God, by whom alone kings reign and princes decree justice, and from whom alone cometh all counsel, wisdom and understanding. We, thy unworthy servants, here gathered together in thy name, do most humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above, to direct and guide us in all our consultations. And grant that we, having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial affections, the result of all our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public will, peace, and tranquility of St. Lucia, and the uniting and knitting together of hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Ghost be with us evermore. Amen. Yeah. Minister of Affairs.
Good morning, members. It would appear that we have a new chaplain. Members, before we proceed to the question which is before us, with us today are members of the National Census team who would like to make a small presentation to members present. So. Thank you, members of the National Census team, and I don't have any announcements, any ministerial statements. Leader of Government Business.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just wish to inform the House on a matter which has been placed in the public domain relating to the order of speakers for this debate of the Appropriation Bill 2022-2023. You'd recall, as it relates to the debate on the estimates, I had attempted with the Leader of the Opposition to arrive at a speaking order through your chairing of a couple of meetings. We were unable to arrive at an understanding, and therefore we were in a situation where the debate concluded without the Leader of the Opposition taking up the opportunity to speak. On this occasion, Mr. Speaker, I wrote to the Leader of the Opposition indicating that we were prepared to reconsider our desire that he rebuts the Leader of the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, and went as far as offering him two options which we thought were quite workable, fair, and reasonable. I think the critical principle for us is that the people of St. Lucia wants to hear the Leader of the Opposition speak. And we said to him that we were prepared if he did not want to rebut the Minister of Finance. And may I say, Mr. Speaker, the budget debate really is a response to the presentation made by the Minister of Finance. It is the Minister of Finance who issues a statement that is then debated. Each minister is required to elucidate, to expand on the presentation made by the Minister of Finance. The debate is not about responding to individual ministers. And we had hoped that the leader of the opposition would have taken the opportunity and to speak at some of the options that we gave him, including allowing him to speak at prime time this evening. In his response to me, Mr. Speaker, he indicated that he wishes to speak at number 15, which is virtually the same position that he had, that of speaking at the ending of the debate. Again, we hope and we encourage the leader of the opposition to speak at a time when it is expected that in any mature debate he would speak. We do not believe, Mr. Speaker, that it makes for a good conduct and orderly debate for him to insist that he has to speak last or at towards the very back end of the debate. So, Mr. Speaker, I want, for the sake of the record of the House, that we have tried, we have extended as much as possible a fair, reasonable offer to the leader of the opposition so that he can speak and the people of St. Lucia can hear his response to the budget statement as presented by the Minister of Finance and Prime Minister. And I want to take this final opportunity to appeal to him that we can all have a mature settlement of this issue by he shifting from an approach which is it has to be his way or no way. So, Mr. Speaker, I hope and I appeal to you also to use your good offices to speak to the leader of the opposition to ensure that he does take up the offer to speak in this debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leader of Government Business. May I remind members that under Standing Order 32.8, a member shall be allotted 1 hour to rebut. If a member wishes an extension of time, a motion would have to be raised for that extension and voted upon. So be mindful of 32.8. I shall, at the 15-minute left mark, inform the speaker or the presenter that there is 15 minutes left, and I will do so again at the 5-minute mark. So, honorable members, please be reminded that when the House rose, the question before it was that the Appropriation 2022-2023 bill be read a second time. Member for Castries Southeast.
It's a natural. Mr. Speaker, colleague ministers, parliamentarians, ladies and gentlemen, I remain honored and at the same time humbled to again address the people of St. Lucia through this honorable House to give support to the appropriation bill that was presented on Tuesday evening by the Honorable Prime Minister, our caring leader, the one who has demonstrated in deeds and in words that all St. Lucians are his concern. The theme, transforming our society while empowering our people, is an appropriate and just way to describe what we have embarked on as duly elected members of this government. Mr. Speaker, I support this bill wholeheartedly, especially on behalf of the poor, marginalized, and underprivileged persons who stand to benefit tremendously. And if I were to summarize this bill in 2 words, I would caption it the clean slate bill, for the mere fact that it is a bill that renews and inspires hope. It is a bill that provides wiggle room for persons who feel caught between a rock and a hard place, a window of opportunity, a space to squeeze through, an open door, a relief, a moment to exhale, a cool breeze on an unbearably hot day, a light at the end of a dark tunnel. I cannot help, Mr. Speaker, but to publicly commend and admire our servant leader, the Prime Minister, for constantly seeking innovative ways to bring impactful change and tangible, meaningful relief to the people of St. Lucia. But, Mr. Speaker, on the other hand, and on the other side, I must express my disappointment at the opposition's fight to speak last. Mr. Speaker, I do not know what it means to speak last. Well, you know, Mr. Speaker, I opted to speak first because it does not matter to me whether you speak first or last. For me, it is not so critical what time you speak. First or last, once you put people first, that's what matters. You see, Mr. Speaker, it matters not whether you speak truth in the morning or in the night, whether late or early, during prime time or any time, spoken to kings or to ordinary people, spoken to any party, truth will always be truth. Ek mwen vle répéter ça en créole. Là ou décide pour parler la vérité, pas mêler qui l'est ou dit, en bas qui condition ou dit, la vérité kay toujours la vérité. Et là où décider pour parler mensonge, et bien menti. Même si on dit dernier, et bien même si on dit premier, en matière c'est en matière, en mensonge c'est en mensonge. Right will always be right, and wrong cannot be right. So speak truth at any time, and every time it will transcend time. And as Martin Luther puts it, right defeated will always be stronger than evil triumphant. So, Mr. Speaker, for the privilege to speak first this morning, I would like to express my sincere thanks and appreciation and gratitude to the people of Castries South East constituency. I also wish to thank them for their assistance and support, prayers and encouragement, for their confidence in me. I also wish to thank my wife and daughters for their inspiration, and my mother and sisters for the prayers. Mr. Speaker, the overarching philosophy guiding the work of my ministry, and which will define our obligations under this Appropriation Bill 2022-2023, is aptly captured in the policy vision statement articulated in the draft revised National Policy Protection Policy. Mr. Speaker, in this financial year, the ministry will undertake a number of important interventions and programs towards the progressive realization of an integrated social protection platform for adequate needs, rights, and the development of the full potential of all citizens, paying particular attention to the poorest and most vulnerable populations. Mr. Speaker, we recognize that poverty is a multidimensional concept comprising of social, economic, and environmental deprivations. We also recognize that to effectively address issues of poverty and vulnerability, we must explore and utilize very appropriate measures and approaches. And so, Mr. Speaker, against this backdrop, and in keeping with the principles articulated in the revised National Social Protection Policy, our approach to social protection will seek to effectively combine measures, interventions, programs that are protective, promotive, preventative, and transformative. Mr. Speaker, protective in that they will provide the necessary support for those living in poverty and protect them from the worst consequences of poverty, that they will offer care, support, and protection to the elderly, the abused, persons with disabilities, and others in need of such care and protection. Promotive, in that they will facilitate access to opportunities for investment, as well as the development for enhancement of people's productive capacity so that they can graduate or be promoted from social assistance programs. Preventative, focusing on resilience building and the implementation of ex-ante measures resilient to prevent persons from falling into poverty as a result of shocks. Importantly as well, our approaches will be transformative in nature and seek to foster inclusiveness and self-reliance. And for a more practical way of visualizing what we will do and why it must be done as per the appropriation bill here, I'm going to share with you some examples of those that will be served. A single mother who at age 21 with 3 or more children, the eldest is 8 years old and physically disabled and remains lying on her back or on her stomach. They reside in a one-room home. She didn't complete secondary school and is unemployed. A single mother, approximately 25 years old, with a disabled child whose father is also the mother's father. She is a rape victim, but also unemployed and homeless. A single mother who, because of domestic violence, is now incarcerated, and her small business of making coconut oil is on hold. Her children are now in some foster care that she is unable to see their development. A couple with 7 children, 5 to 11, their housing condition is below standard and the parents are unemployed. Senior persons living alone without care or adequate medicine and basic food items. The housing condition is very poor. Victims who have not recovered from fires and other disasters. The many unemployed youth. The imprisoned youth who are wondering if they will get a second chance on their release from prison. They believe that they can turn their lives around, but are worried that society will not give them a chance. The poor man and woman who is terminally sick. The sick who is on the street and needs food. The many young men and women who are correctional institutions who are seeking ways to move forward, but because they understand that it is not how you start the race of life that matters, but how you finish. The young men and women who are discouraged but need to continue to advance their business ideas, understanding that their contribution to this economy is vital for the survival of all of us. The grandmother who is caring for her grandchildren because their parents are now deceased. Mr. Speaker, from the perspective of the Ministry of Equity, these are the scenarios that drive this government to take the decisions proposed in this current appropriation bill. And to some of the programs, Mr. Speaker, perhaps the most well-known program of my ministry is the Public Assistance Program, PAP, or welfare as it is commonly known. This is the largest cash transfer program in St. Lucia, and prior to October 2020, there were 2,600 households on this program. In response to COVID-19, the ministry fast-tracked the planned expansion of this program to accommodate an additional 1,000 eligible households, bringing the total to 3,600 households, which means we are actually targeting approximately 11,500 persons. Mr. Speaker, in addition to this expansion, an important difference to note in the administration of the program is that the entire household is now recognized as the unit to be focused on and not 1 or 2 individuals within the households. You see, Mr. Speaker, with the previous system, it was possible for a household of 10 or 12 to receive a minimum stipend of $215 if one person applied and was deemed eligible for welfare assistance. Whereas in considering the entire household, in keeping with the household assessment eligibility, the maximum of $465 would be applicable. Mr. Speaker, I must also highlight that while this shift to household focus is commendable, this arrangement has doubled the funding required for delivery of the program, given the higher number of large families reaching out for assistance. Consequently, on a monthly basis, the ministry will expend over $1 million on support to most vulnerable under the public assistance program. And in fact, for the 2022-23 financial year, the operational budget of the public assistance program is $16.2 million, and that is only for the cash transfer component, not taking into account the additional support services provided to clients. However, Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding this formidable sum, and notwithstanding the current economic difficulties, the Honorable Prime Minister and this government, given commitment to putting people first, has pledged to provide the required support. Mr. Speaker, this is what it means to care about people, that we make the sacrifice, we commit ourselves, and in spite of difficult economic times, this Prime Minister is committed to providing the additional funds to support people who need it. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Prime Minister has directed that payment to public assistance beneficiary households be consistently processed within a time frame to allow them to receive it by the end of the month, similar to persons receiving their salary. So, Mr. Speaker, well, Mr. Speaker, mwen pou di sa Creole. Premier ministre, c'est moun ki ka receive l'argent tous les mois. Ça yo pa kouye welfare. L'argent les pauvres. Premier ministre dit yo pas supposé receive l'argent n'importe là. Yo ni pour receive tous les mois, même comme moun ki ka han salaire parce que l'argent est important pour eux. Mr. Speaker, the delays in payment experienced previously will be something of the past. Mr. Speaker, we care about our less fortunate brothers and sisters, and we want to ensure that they are adequately catered for. But Mr. Speaker, even in addressing the short-term needs of households for cash transfers, we do not intend to create a dependency on government or to render the public assistance program a burdensome to taxpayers. We recognize the capacity and the potential of each individual family unit, and we will continue our efforts to develop the human capital and empower people towards independent living. I am therefore to announce that under the Human Capital Resilience Program, the Ministry is currently considering a graduation strategy for social assistance program in St. Lucia. This strategy, Mr. Speaker, will be extremely important to guide the household's transition process from social assistance recipient to sustainable independent living. Several graduation pathways have been identified, and in partnership with other ministries and agencies, opportunities will be explored for engaging individuals and households in various ways to support their graduation from assistance programs. Mr. Speaker, we are aware of the many calls to remove persons from the public assistance beneficiary list. But we are mindful that this process must be managed carefully so that persons are not simply removed only to return shortly after in need of assistance. Mr. Speaker, we are very serious about helping people, building or enhancing their capacity and improving their circumstances in a way that they are able to meet the needs of their families. And so, Mr. Speaker, we have identified and designed some concrete programs to make that happen. For example, Mr. Speaker, you may recall the contribution of $450,000 generously pledged by Lucia towards a social assistance fund to be managed by the St. Lucia Social Development Fund, the SSDF. Mr. Speaker, we have discussed appropriate use of this fund and have developed a project focused on improving the livelihoods of single mothers and former inmates of Bodley's Correctional Facility. For this project, Mr. Speaker, 30 eligible single mothers will be drawn from the beneficiaries list of public assistance program and will be exposed to knowledge and skills and mentorship opportunities to engage in sustainable livelihoods that will benefit their families. Training in soft skills, entrepreneurship, as well as access to startup loans and micro-enterprise advisory support are aspects of this project, which will be implemented by the SSDF in collaboration with the Bell Fund, the Welfare Unit, the Youth Economy Agency, and other key stakeholders. Such an initiative, we expect, Mr. Speaker, will yield tangible results and will have real impact in transforming the lives of the poor and vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, we are also looking at human capacity development as another pathway for graduation from the Public Assistance Program and have started work on identifying eligible candidates from the public assistance households for TVET relevant training. This, we believe, Mr. Speaker, will provide more sustainable avenues for engagement in productive endeavors and ultimately graduation from public assistance. Mr. Speaker, with respect to the $1.2 million provided for housing assistance, by this Prime Minister, we want to support and promote that our poor households that are deprived will receive assistance. Mr. Speaker, I do not want to venture into housing as a discussion, but Mr. Speaker, in recent times I've heard so much discussion about housing support, as if prior to this administration there was never any sort of housing assistance going on before. Mr. Speaker, we are mindful that housing support ranges from providing maybe a 200 square foot of home space to an individual. But there are persons who have luxurious homes and they use it for investment. Mr. Speaker, we are not in the business for creating investment for persons, but to support persons with need to retrofit their homes. So replacement of roofs, existing floors, to fix a window, to ensure people are more comfortable, and sometimes even to facilitate a small extension to protect a young daughter who is of age, are some of the initiatives that we embark on with our allocation of $1.2 million. So, Mr. Speaker, that must be understood. We do not go on persons' land to build homes for persons because we do not want to be guilty of trespassing. So we provide materials, like in the case of Bokowen, and the community or the persons themselves find the labor to help themselves. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, we will assess the comprehensive need of households and provide a package of support needed to make a difference. Why, Mr. Speaker? Because we are serious about improving the lives of the poor and the vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, as I have said before, we understand our people. We understand the challenges. We will work with everyone as needed to improve their standard of living. Mr. Speaker, we have begun discussions on the provision of prepaid electricity for some of those households. Mr. Speaker, in recent times, we have seen a number of persons seeking assistance for reconnection or payment for electricity bill. Mr. Speaker, I personally engaged Lucia on the possibility of embarking on prepaid electricity, which is a proper approach. Prepaid electricity, persons could go to a supermarket or an outlet where they can buy electricity, prepaid on their phone, and they can manage what they have purchased. Mr. Speaker, I am extremely happy that I've received correspondence from the manager of Lucia indicating that in 2023, they will pilot the rollout of prepaid electricity to some of our poor households. Mr. Speaker, this is an important shift. This is a poor approach in dealing with persons having access to basic services like water and those services. Mr. Speaker, it is comforting to know that a single mother can top up electricity with $100 and is sensitive to the fact that it's only $100 of electricity on her phone, and she could monitor how she's using it. This, in a way, would prevent her from being disconnected. And research has shown in places where persons have prepaid electricity, they do not have the incidence of disconnection in the manner that we experience in here. So I could tell those persons, these 3,600 households who are on the public assistance program, who are vulnerable, who are deemed vulnerable and poor, that we are coming not only to provide public assistance, but to find ways of means of making it easier for them to live. Mr. Speaker, in this regard, I would like to thank Lucia for always coming forward to assist the poor people in St. Lucia when they see there's a need. Mr. Speaker, with respect to the issue of coordinated service delivery and ensuring the right package of support is provided to households, I have also had several policy-level discussions with my ministry and agencies for improvement of internal coordination towards more efficient and effective delivery of services and greater impact. So going forward, the ministry with its various units, research and policy, community services, welfare services, Division of Human Services, the Bell Fund, Upton Girls Garden, the National Conservation Authority, the St. Lucia Social Development Fund, the Boys Training Center, will maintain even closer collaboration for comprehensive support to clients so that they are able to move out of the current circumstances and improve their standard of living. Mr. Speaker, the impact of our social interventions must be felt, and we are determined to utilize various approaches to make this happen. Mr. Speaker, it is not only about the reduction of the statistics on poverty, but also, Mr. Speaker, it is about the principle of equity, social justice, and human rights. Mr. Speaker, aside from the public assistance cash transfer, my ministry facilitates a number of support services to the beneficiaries of the public assistance. Over the last year, Mr. Speaker, we have provided support to burial assistance, medical assistance, housing, emergency housing assistance, and at this time I want to say thank God for the return of the distress fund. Mr. Speaker, many St. Lucians wouldn't know the circumstances that allow us to find emergency housing for people. But through the court system, families sometimes ought to be removed immediately from a home because children are at risk. And the human services is called. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, most of the emergency housing are for families that we need to rent accommodations, sometimes in private areas, Mr. Speaker. And currently we pay monthly almost $8,300 to maintain families in emergency shelters. And there are about 18 families that we currently have that service for, Mr. Speaker. But their numbers are important and it's increasing based on what is happening on the ground, and we need to be in a position to do so. And therefore the distress fund is back, is God sent to help the ordinary people in St. Lucia. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, we will continue the support to 312 children with disabilities. They receive financial support at a rate of $200 per month under the Child Disability Grant Program. 176 children in court-mandated foster care receive $300 monthly, and 88 persons living with HIV, persons living with HIV program receive food vouchers valued at $100 monthly. Mr. Speaker, while these three programs together cost in excess of $1.5 million annually, my ministry is critically assessing the Child Disability Grant and persons living with HIV programs in particular to see how this service can be improved or expanded, as we have noticed some deficiencies with respect to coverage as well as the benefit level. I will return to the child disability later on, Mr. Speaker, but I would like to focus on some of the programs within agencies within the ministry. Mr. Speaker, if you turn your attention to various departments, you look at the St. Lucia Social Development Fund. Mr. Speaker, through its diverse program in the St. Lucia Social Development Fund continues to provide requisite and timely support to persons in need on an annual basis. Through a number of programs, including HOPE, which is now back, Holistic Opportunities for Personal Empowerment, Kudme Setlisi. We're speaking about educational assistance, housing assistance. Mr. Speaker, the Basic Need Trust Fund program, Our Boys Matter. These programs are very important, Mr. Speaker, and while we continue, we are pleased that there are resources. I would like to, through you, inform that we have worked with community-based organizations in the past, and we will continue and we will intensify, Mr. Speaker, especially with our feeding program. So Feed the Poor Ministry, Gaspar Henry, RISE, CC, other community-based, Raise Your Voice. These community-based organizations have always worked with the St. Lucia Social Development Fund in assisting us, and we will continue to provide the support to these agencies through grant support so that they can effectively carry out their own activities on the ground. And we encourage community-based organizations to join the fight in terms of responding to issues on the ground. Government alone cannot do it. So I say thanks to Gaspar Henry, Rise, Rash Cherry, CC, Raise Your Voice in the person like Catherine Silas and other persons who are involved, some faith-based organizations as well who have the soup program feeding people in certain parts in Soufre. All of these community-based organizations will find support under the HOPE program so that we continue to support our people on the ground. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned previously, job losses as a result of COVID-19 made it extremely difficult for parents to provide some of the most important basic needs, including school needs for children. And so to ensure access to relevant resources for continuity of learning by all students, the government provided financial support through the SSDF to support families in need. The Educational Access Program, therefore, represents a key social assistant intervention for vulnerable households within all 17 constituencies. Mr. Speaker, a total of $1.8 million was allocated for this program, and over 2,000 households will be benefiting in this assistance. Tuition support, transportation, the procurement of learning devices in collaboration with the Ministry of Education will all be part of this intervention. Mr. Speaker, and I need to take time here to acknowledge a program that came out that we met by ourselves that was implemented at the St. Lucia Social Development Fund, our Boys Matter program. Mr. Speaker, when something is good, you need to say it's good. Le bon dit bon. So this program is a program we met. It was set up at the SSDF under the last administration. We recognized it, we evaluated it, we saw that it's a good program, and this Prime Minister provided support for its continuation. Mr. Speaker, this is the kind of government that we are, not because we didn't originate an idea that we will take it away. So the Boys Matter program is another SSDF important social assistance program. This program, which commenced in 2018, represents an excellent PPP, public-private partnership, a collaborative effort between the St. Lucia Social Development Fund, Massey Stores, and St. Lucia Electricity Services, Lucilec. Primarily, the program seeks to arrest the pervading challenge in many secondary schools island-wide, where a number of our boys from poor and vulnerable households either drop out of school or graduate from secondary school without literary or technical skills. Mr. Speaker, through this various interventions, this program provides support in 3 pillars. Importantly, financial support, the psychosocial support, and mentorship. To date, Mr. Speaker, the program has served in excess of 100 boys from Form 2 to Form 5 at 11 secondary schools around the island, and we are seeing positive results. Mr. Speaker, we are not just focused on the young, we also care about our senior citizens as well. And so through the SSDF, we also provide care and assistance to approximately 709 persons under the home care program. This program ensures that our senior citizens island-wide receive adequate care and continue to live dignified lives in the latter years. The program, which also employed 506 caregivers, also provide basic sanitary and hygiene supplies in cases where they are needed. Mr. Speaker, our elderly have a right to a dignified living and at this stage of their life. For me, Mr. Speaker, this is an extremely important program, one which I'm happy that it has continued and it is funded and it is strengthened for greater effectiveness based on the recommendation of a recently concluded evaluation. Notice, Mr. Speaker, for the Boys Matter program, we evaluated it and we kept it, and it's funded. For the elder care program, we evaluated it immediately and we are strengthening it. Mr. Speaker, and to the Basic Needs Trust Fund program, it is also implemented through the SSDF. This program is in its 10th cycle. It is the oldest social program here in St. Lucia, being supported by grant funds from the St. Lucia Social Development Fund. It is where the CDB is providing 95% of the grant and the government is providing only 5%. And for this cycle, a number of projects have been identified for implementation up until 2024 under various components. These are the livelihood sector, the education sector, water and sanitation sector, and access and drainage sector. Under the livelihood sector, there's an Artscape development project in partnership with the Cultural Development Foundation. Phase 2 of the Grosley Music Studio located at the Grosley HRDC for equipment, furnishing, and operationalization of the studios. Aquaponics for sustainable food production, training of trainers, and some residents in aquaponics for Larissus Viewfort. Green opportunity for life development training in technical and agricultural areas, Regold project, that's at NSDC. Under the education sector, rehabilitation of the Babono Combined School to include pre-kindergarten class, upgrade of the Entripo Early Childhood Development Center or Daycare Center as it was previously called, rehabilitation of the Bishop Charles Gaje Primary School in Masha to include pre-garden classes, construction of an Early Childhood Development Center in Labey, rehabilitation of the Lakwa Mengo Combined School to include pre-garden class, rehabilitation of a block wall at the Soufre Primary School to include demolition of the roof, plumbing, electrical, tiling, and furnishing, establishment of a music training after-school program in Strozel, financial assistance to meet the cost of instruments, rehabilitation of a food and nutrition health laboratory at the Viewfort Comprehensive Secondary School. Water and sanitation include access. Water and sanitation includes the installation of a water tank, almost 100,000 gallons, and lines at Victoria Strozel. And for access and drainage, construction of a road at Cronglands, Goodlands, and Dorado Ancillary. Mr. Speaker, the total cost of the BNTF 10 is a little over $4.9 million. Mr. Speaker, no, there's no doctrine that seeks to keep anybody out. In fact, if you notice, Roselle is getting even more in terms of the amount. Yeah, yes, more than you. You're only getting a studio. Mr. Speaker, there are a number of other projects being implemented through the ministry, but I will focus briefly on two of them, the Human Capital Resilience and the SDG Fund Joint Program. The Human Capital Resilience Project, Mr. Speaker, was operationalized in 2020 as an important initiative to address issues of poverty, vulnerability to shocks, and youth employment in St. Lucia. This project, which is supported by the World Bank, also supports the government two-pronged strategy for building greater human capital and resilience. Through this project, Mr. Speaker, my ministry is seeking to drive a comprehensive reform of the existing social protection system and has facilitated or is currently engaged in the following activities: recertification and expansion of the public assistance program, which is near completion, review and update the National Social Protection Policy and Implementations Plan. Mr. Speaker, on this matter, I wish to announce that the final draft of this policy, which was developed through a participatory approach, will be subjected to further community consultation next month. And this is important as we need to ensure that persons are aware and have contributed to the final document, which will guide what we do and how we do it. Mr. Speaker, once this is done, the policy and action plan will be brought to Cabinet for approval and officially adopted as our guide, our social protection work plan. However, Mr. Speaker, I must pause here to say that everyone that no matter how good this document is, the communal ownership, the collaboration, working together in delivering social protection services is what will bring life to a social policy. As such, we should not just be content with the completion of this document, but rather I implore everyone to join hands with practitioners within the social sector to address the social issues confronting us and to uplift our vulnerable brothers and sisters as necessary. Mr. Speaker, we are also at an advanced stage of the development of a graduation strategy for social assistance program in St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, I spoke earlier about the importance of equipping households with the right skills to facilitate graduation from social assistance program, and so I look forward to the conclusion of this consultancy of this strategy and subsequent results. Mr. Speaker, under the project, a communication strategy and implementation support plan for social protection in the Ministry of Equity is also being developed. Mr. Speaker, I would like to be guided by how much time I have left.
23 minutes.
Thank you. This is important, Mr. Speaker, as our people have the right to know what services are available and where and how they can be accessed. Mr. Speaker, also relating to Kudme Setlisi and Public Assistance Program, we will develop the relevant documentation operations manual to guide appropriate implementation. Mr. Speaker, we are streamlining, we are strengthening, we are improving for best use of the scarce resources while delivering quality and efficient service. Later on, Mr. Speaker, the ministry will focus on the establishment of an integrated social information system, which will include a social registry and a central beneficiary registry. We expect that this system will be interoperable with other information management systems across public service and will significantly improve data management for decision making. There is also the benefit of harmonized delivery of services, which of course lend itself to maximizing efficiencies. Mr. Speaker, through the implementation of the SDG Joint Fund Program, the ministry has focused on the use of research, analysis, and monitoring and evaluation to support the evidence-based development of an adaptive social protection system. Specifically, through the execution of these activities, the ministry was able to generate evidence which will inform practice for improved emergency preparedness and response linked to a more flexible national social protection system. With support from the UN partners, the ministry has developed a vulnerability index for St. Lucia as a targeting tool for shock disaster response. Mr. Speaker, a vulnerability index is important. Mr. Speaker, I recall some time ago, St. Lucians were, making noise about who was being served food during COVID, who were running after a truck with food saying that they're not being given. And there's this big noise about people being left or being serving because of political preference was the talk of the day. Mr. Speaker, the vulnerability index, as I've seen it, is, while is it a complex mathematical formula, but it takes the SLNet 3 that identify who is poor and subject it to further analysis to determine among the poor who should be given priority. So when there's a disaster, that tool is implemented so we know if we are distributing food, who should receive first as a result of the disaster. And this is what I love about the vulnerability index. This tool, which can be used to prioritize persons impacted by disasters or shocks for assistance, was piloted last year with good results. Mr. Speaker, it is our intention to modify this tool so that it can also assist in identifying priority population based on hazard exposure, which can then inform mitigation or risk reduction measures and response. Mr. Speaker, while some persons may not yet see the value of targeting, and I know sometimes I'm referred to in some quarters as SLNet, I will emphasize that with limited resources, it is imperative that we find ways to prioritize and to direct resources to those most in need. Targeting, therefore, is critical for us here in St. Lucia because resources are scarce. Therefore, working with the World Food Programme, the ministry will continue to improve the tool for application when needed. Under this project, Mr. Speaker, there is also an ongoing arrangement to review and update the National Social Protection Bill, which was developed in 2015 but never enacted. Mr. Speaker, we will agree that the 1967 Public Assistance Act is outdated, and as such focus on strengthening the social protection legal framework is both necessary and timely. Mr. Speaker, other important research work which will guide policy formulation have also been undertaken under this project, as well as the development of standard operating procedures to guide practical operations with respect to shock response using social protection programs or instruments. Mr. Speaker, we are happy for the support of all donors, and we express our sincere appreciation and gratitude for the assistance and support received. Mr. Speaker, we remain committed to strengthening the social protection system and closing the inequality gap, the Gini coefficient. Mr. Speaker, we must reduce this inequality that continues to place some of our people at one end of the spectrum and others at the other. It is that we contend with, Mr. Speaker, sometimes that you see it play out everywhere in St. Lucia. We will therefore continue to manage the investment made in our people, expanding coverage as practical and facilitating the delivery of a comprehensive range of services to meet the needs of those most vulnerable. In summary, Mr. Speaker, we will ensure the following during this financial year as we advance ongoing social protection reform: strengthening the regulatory and policy framework for social protection through the enactment of Social Protection Act, as well as the approval of the revised Social Protection Policy and Implementation Plan; finalization of the graduation strategy and programs so that individuals and households can graduate from social assistance programs and enjoy independent living; rationalization of existing social programs to ensure that the appropriate level of assistance reaches those most in need, and in an effort to effectively improve their circumstances; strengthening existing social interventions and programs to effectively support youth at risk and vulnerable households; strengthening delivery systems and institutions for effective and efficient delivery of social protection programs. Mr. Speaker, the ministry experimented with digital payments last year to a small group of individuals, and this was well received. Recognizing the vulnerability of our islands to disasters and noting that financial institutions may not be operating after a disaster, we seek to expand these digital payment options during this year. Mr. Speaker, other areas of focus include the development of an integrated social information system to support a more coordinated delivery of social assistance programs, thereby significantly reducing wastage and optimizing scarce resources, and exploring the feasibility of establishing a social insurance scheme in St. Lucia through partnership arrangement with the NIC and other stakeholders. Mr. Speaker, there are a number of other initiatives that are very dear to me which I am seeking to operationalize through my ministry. One such area being explored is that of the establishment of a child rehabilitation center to provide targeted programming and intervention geared towards the protection, education, and rehabilitation and reintegration of children within the child justice system. It is the vision that this center will effectively replace the Boys Training Center and will be established at a different location. I've had conversation with
Member Bukashri Salvis, you have 15 minutes left.
Thank you. Sufficient time to conclude. So it is the vision of that this center, the Child Rehabilitation Center, will effectively replace the Boys Training Center and will be established at a different location to the existing facility. Mr. Speaker, the concept of this facility has been developed, and we have had preliminary discussions with the CDB on this project. We are also actively exploring all options for the establishment of this facility which I believe is extremely critical at this time. Alongside the establishment of this facility, Mr. Speaker, the ministry has a vision for an effective aftercare program for youth transitioning from juvenile institution and has developed a concept for institutionalization of this program. This program is intended to support the services of the Child Rehabilitation Center with a focus on the re-entry or reintegration of children into the society. And Mr. Speaker, as an extension of support to the center and aftercare program, we have also envisaged the establishment of a youth safe house with services that reinforce and complement what exists in the rehabilitation center and the aftercare program. Mr. Speaker, the youth safe house will serve as a shelter for vulnerable youth who are experiencing homelessness or home dysfunctions that may compromise their ability to live pro-social lifestyle until they are able to live independently. The services will be provided at this facility will include a safe place to live, psychosocial support by caseworkers to ensure compliance with planning goals, opportunities for skill development, and financial resources for youth safe house entrepreneurial programs, life and social skills. Mr. Speaker, yet another program of importance to us at the Ministry of Equity is the National Mentorship Program. We believe that such a program can be a powerful intervention for addressing some of our social issues being manifested in the society. Acknowledging the value of role models in helping to shape behavior, attitudes of others, such an approach can complement existing interventions. Under the JJRP Last Mile Project, the ministry intends to develop the framework for this program, which will be implemented later on. Mr. Speaker, still on the initiative pertaining to children, to date, St. Lucia has adopted and passed 3 of 5 OECS family law bills. The Child Justice Act, the Child Care and Protection and Adoption Act was passed in 2018, and the Domestic Violence Act was passed in 2022. Still outstanding are the status of children and child maintenance legislation. During this fiscal year, Mr. Speaker, the ministry through the Division of Human Services will bring these into focus for relevant consultation and subsequent drafting. Mr. Speaker, in this financial year, we have also committed to strengthening the Division of Human Services in an effort to increase its capacity for addressing the range of social issues being brought to its attention for resolution. Mr. Speaker, the issues are many. The requests are mounting and the demands are unrelenting, and therefore we must adequately support our frontline workers there. Mr. Speaker, earlier I promised to speak a little on children with disability and on some of the issues we are confronted with. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Equity provides a small grant of $200 monthly to children with moderate to severe disabilities up to the age of 21. While this may assist in providing some basic needs, the ministry is concerned about the social needs of those children, as in many cases they are kept within the confines of their homes. There are also instances which have been brought to my attention, Mr. Speaker, where parents, particularly single mothers, are unable to work to provide for herself and her child because she must remain home to care for her child who has a disability. Given this, Mr. Speaker, the ministry has considered the establishment of a residential facility and daycare center for children with disabilities where they can socialize and participate in activities as appropriate under the care and supervision of trained personnel. Such a facility will allow single parents, single mothers with a child or children with disabilities to participate in the labor market, knowing that the child is in a safe environment. Mr. Speaker, this is a dire need, and we hope to encounter little delays in the realization of this facility. We have commenced dialogue with key stakeholders on this initiative, and as it relates to the design conceptualization and the eventual establishment, I look forward with much anticipation to securing the necessary financial resources for the establishment of this center. Mr. Speaker, this year will be a busy one for the Ministry of Equity. As I speak, we are at a project appraisal stage with the CDB for a $14 million EC COVID response project, which we expect to roll out by July 2022. This project has several components, include income support for persons who are still unemployed, having lost their jobs as a result of COVID-19, support for feeding the homeless, support for learning continuity among vulnerable groups, BTC, Uptowns, New Beginning Transit Home, and all these special education schools, horizontal expansion of the public assistance program, focusing on support for over 800 eligible households on the waiting list, support to 114 children with disabilities on the waiting list, and a vertical expansion of persons living with HIV program to increase the food voucher from $100 to $200, and the foster care program increased from $300 to $400 for the duration of the project. Mr. Speaker, we are also working with the CDB on the design of a $4 million US social resilience project, which we intend to launch next year. Mr. Speaker, we have been careful to ensure that activities across the various projects do not duplicate efforts, but rather are complementary in nature and support the broad outcomes of the social protection reform. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, this social resilience project will focus on two main components: institutional strengthening and capacity building. Mr. Speaker, just to give some brief insights on the institutional strengthening component project activities, we'll focus on strengthening the digitized payment platform for public assistance beneficiaries, review of NIC to ascertain modality of incorporating an unemployment insurance system to strengthen resilience of its operations, particularly in response to increased levels of unemployment claims arising during the period of shock crisis, and 3, the establishment of a monitoring and evaluation system to track the impact of financial support to beneficiaries of bail fund. The capacity building component, Mr. Speaker, will focus on 1, strengthening the psychosocial and mental health training programs for counselors and social workers, supporting small and micro enterprises through the James Belgrave Micro Enterprise Development Fund, and strengthening work-enriched apprenticeship programs to support short-term employment. Mr. Speaker, this government cares about people. We understand that there are those among us who need assistance to get out of challenging and unpleasant circumstances. We understand the need for an inclusive social protection system to support the poor and vulnerable. We understand the significance of such a system as a critical component of human development and also as a conduit for achieving a wider national development goals. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, through resource provision as well as capacity building, we will strengthen our agencies and departments to continue to work with our people and for our people. We will continue to invest available resources in building human capital towards sustainable national development. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I want to remind us that it is critical that St. Lucians listening will analyze everything that is said. Mr. Speaker, it is Ann Thompson in a book entitled Critical Reasoning. She intimated that we have some ideas about whom to trust to give us correct information on subjects which are less familiar to us. Mr. Speaker, I understand and I know that St. Lucians trust the information coming from this side. I wish to say with what has been said, I trust Philip G. Pierre as a person. I trust the Minister of Finance. I trust the Honorable Prime Minister that he will always consider bread, justice, and freedom as we embark on this road. Mr. Speaker, we prayed every Monday when we have, and God has answered our prayers. And the fruit of the Spirit we all can see. Mr. Speaker, I have no doubt that when I listened to the presentation from our leader, that even while we sat in cabinet, everything flowed in a way that even we were surprised to capture the collective in what we have actually put together in the rooms over so many months. Mr. Speaker, for those who didn't believe, they can all see it today. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm extremely happy about the strides that we have made. Mr. Speaker, I think there is a good spirit out there. The light of hope seems to have touched the minds of a few. It is starting to spread like COVID-19. We can call our neighbors. We can call those in the diaspora. We could call our friends. We can say, listen to the programs and plans of this government. It provides an opportunity. It provides a light in a dark tunnel. It provides a second chance to our people. I have no doubt, Mr. Speaker, that as we remain true to what we have started and as we work hard, tirelessly, to bring about the change that is needed for our people, that I think it would be a blessing not just to them but to all of us here. So today, Mr. Speaker, I wish to ask God blessings upon all of us here and all of the work that we have done thus far, that He multiplies it and that it reaches beyond those we are just serving. I want to thank you this morning, colleague members, and to you, Mr. Speaker, for your patience. Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I ended, but I was supposed to introduce the best is yet to come.
The member for Grosley.
Yes. Mr. Speaker, to use a sports metaphor, I am pleased to be opening the baton today with the member for Castries Southeast. He has always shown his ability to face all. It could be the new ball, it could be anything, with a level of grace. He's able to stand and smile. And at the end of his innings, he still holds his bat. And I know his little jab at the end is for his Forester playing field. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm also glad that the captain of this outstanding team, the member for Castries East, he won the toss on July 21st, 2021. And he bravely decided to bat. So far, Mr. Speaker, he has been extremely tactful. First of all, with his batting lineup, the cabinet of ministers. And he has analyzed the batting conditions very, very well, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the captain of this team very early on understood that if you want to bat for 5 days, or in our case 5 years, you need a heavy roller. And so, Mr. Speaker, the heavy roller so far has allowed us to bat on a pitch that allows us to flourish and ensure that we can negotiate the bounds and do what we must do for the people of this country. And so, Mr. Speaker, I am happy on Tuesday to have sat in this beautiful stadium and watch my captain start off by rotating the strike nicely, getting the ones and twos, then stroking the fours, and then when you thought it was over, hit massive 60s towards the end of his innings. Now, Mr. Speaker, there is constant talk on social media about the opposing side want to choose to hold their strike bowler for certain times during this match, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, but this captain has assembled a team of very competent all-rounders. Very competent all-rounders, Mr. Speaker. And so we still have, Mr. Speaker, from Denry North, somebody who's opened the batting at many occasions with the finesse and calm. And we still have, Mr. Speaker, at any time they decide to send that bowler, the man from Viewfort North, who is ready and waiting in the wings, Mr. Speaker. We still have, Mr. Speaker, the one from Labrie with great timing and class, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, he decided that he was going to select a pit bull fast bowler who is still there and waiting at the end and can still come and hit massive sixes whenever he is called. Stay tuned. Yes. So, Mr. Speaker, as I rise to make my first contribution to a policy debate in this country, let me once again pay homage to the people of Grosley who saw the vision of this SLP government and believe that the policies outlined first by me in the area of youth and sports development and by this government as it pertains to the overall development of this country, let me thank them for their confidence. As such, Mr. Speaker, delve into this year's appropriation bill and speak to the finances of the Youth and Sports Development Ministry and how it will be appropriated. Now, Mr. Speaker, upon assuming the position of Minister of Youth Development and Sports, I immediately embarked on a mission of ensuring that the structural framework of the ministry were in place. COVID-19 provided a number of setbacks in the beginning, and so I called on the senior staff at the ministry to get to work on developing the different policies that are needed to ensure great youth and sports development throughout this great nation. Mr. Speaker, we did not have a facility management policy. There was no naming rights policy. There was no youth policy implemented, and what we found, bills, bills, and more bills. More bills. As a result, Mr. Speaker, over a few months, the likes of Ursula Delordi Daniel, Patrick Maffrey, Terry Finister, Anthony Lawentine, Sabatus Hunt, they have completed St. Lucia's first ever facilities management and maintenance policy. Mr. Speaker, this policy is critical to the overall development of sports in this nation. I will never forget the harrowing experience of seeing the electricity bills amounting to over $100,000 a month at the Darren Sammy Stadium. Mr. Speaker, for almost 3 years, while our monies were being spent elsewhere, the bills were not being paid. And so, Mr. Speaker, I will never forget, and St. Lucia must never forget, that upon assuming this role as Minister of Youth Development and Sports, that there was a water bill at the Darren Sammy Cricket Grounds of over $700,000. Now, Mr. Speaker, someone may argue that it's a cricket ground, that you are going to use water to maintain the grass, that you are going to use water to flush toilets and to clean the facility. But, Mr. Speaker, 2 years under that previous reign, there was COVID. There was COVID, yet the water bill was $700,000. $700,000. But, Mr. Speaker, Under this new administration, with an energetic SSI board of directors, we just decided that we need to investigate what is going on at the Darren Sammy Cricket Ground. Something had to have been wrong, Mr. Speaker. And so we employed people, a plumber from Wasco, and he did a full assessment of the Darren Sammy Cricket Grounds. Mr. Speaker, we discovered 26 leaks at the Darren Sammy Cricket Grounds. 26 leaks. Mr. Speaker, this reeks of neglect, Mr. Speaker. This reeks of a previous government who just did not care. And so, Mr. Speaker, the Board of SSI has spent thousands of dollars in repairs to the plumbing to ensure that this never happens again. So, Mr. Speaker, with this new facilities management and maintenance policy, we will ensure that the maintenance of this facility is not just done just before CPL or international cricket, that we have a maintenance plan that goes throughout the year, Mr. Speaker. This is responsible governance. Mr. Speaker, while we are on policies and facilities, never again in this great nation of ours should millions be spent on a facility without the involvement of the ordinary athlete or administrator of the sport. Never again. Mr. Speaker, the monstrosity that is the DSH racing track is an embarrassment, and it's a signal of poor sport policy or planning during that period. Mr. Speaker, in consultation with the equestrian sports individuals in the South, yes, Mr. Speaker, went down South, had a full meeting with them. They indicated that there was no consultation, they were not involved in any way. And as a matter of fact, they are not even able to access the facility. Mr. Speaker, this indicated a simple top-down approach to the development of horse racing in St. Lucia. So, Mr. Speaker, under this Ministry of Youth Development and Sports, we have decided to develop a proper program for equestrian athletes to be instituted. This program includes youth involvement in the communities and schools, training programs including nutrition, fitness for jockeys, and breeding for the horses. Mr. Speaker, health and safety is important to this industry, and this is a major part of the development plan. Participation, Mr. Speaker, at the lower levels, and then competition. Mr. Speaker, it is then we can start thinking about spreading horse racing north, south, east, and west in a proper manner. And this is the approach that we should have. This is the approach we should be teaching our children and young persons in sports. Mr. Speaker, there is also a situation in the South that really must never happen again in this country. We really must have better cross-collaboration to ensure that we don't do magie with ourselves in sports, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, not again. We have an Olympic-sized George Odlum Stadium, though neglected by the previous administration. Mr. Speaker, DCA approval was granted to someone to construct a chicken coop, a major chicken coop across the stadium, feet away on the mangrove, Mr. Speaker.
30 feet away.
Mr. Speaker, anybody who does a simple evaluation of this knows that the direction of the sea breeze brings that scent into the stadium. And anybody who knows anything about athletics knows that when you are in physical activities, when you breathe in the most, Mr. Speaker. And so, it says to me that there was no collaboration and no thinking. There was myopia in the previous government, Mr. Speaker. And breaking of laws, Mr. Speaker, all over, because there must have been something wrong. Because I cannot understand how this happened, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, I have said to the sportsmen and women in the South that this is rather unfortunate, to say the least, and that they should do all within their power to stop this madness. Mr. Speaker, we as a government must mitigate against those sort of developments around our national grounds, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, Soufrière. Mr. Speaker, what happened in the pristine community of Soufrière must never, ever, ever happen again. Mr. Speaker, when approaching the sports facility, to the ordinary man, you would marvel and you would feel impressed by what the naked eye can see. But, Mr. Speaker, the sports fraternity is not that stupid. Mr. Speaker, as I've said before, Belflare, solo there. Mr. Speaker, what happened at the Soufrière Mini Stadium is tantamount to a young lady seeing a young man with a six-pack. When you see the young man with the six-pack, you say, oh my God, this is the man, what an attractive man. But by the time you speak to him, he just say, dirty. This is what has happened. This is what has happened to the Soufrière Mini Stadium. Or a beautiful young lady that you see, but at the end of the day you fall sick and cannot boil water. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when you tell me, Mr. Speaker, that you closed the Soufrière Mini Stadium for almost 4 years, you took out all the natural, pristine, safe, healthy grass. You replaced it with plastic or rubber. You reduced the scope of community recreation by destroying cricket in Soufrière. Best league in cricket in St. Lucia. You paid a contractor $150,000 for site clearance at a flood-prone area called Ruby before the election. Then you proceed to place a track around the field without any curbing. You eliminated the possibility of developing athletes in field events like javelin, shot put, and discus, because you cannot have these events without grass. You cannot have these events without grass. They can't. I'm coming to that. I'm coming to that. Mr. Speaker, borrowed. What's worse about this, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that in its current form, this beautiful and scenic facility may never gain regional or international accreditation. They cannot get accreditation. You spent all this money. Mr. Speaker, they built a long jump pit on the D. On the D. Mr. Speaker, let me explain to you what a D is, Mr. Speaker. You have a track that is 400 meters. The D is considered the curb, Mr. Speaker. You will never watch track and field anywhere in the world and see long jump taking place along that D. You would see it on the street, Mr. Speaker. Nowhere in the world, Mr. Speaker, but in St. Lucia. We cannot get accreditation, as a matter of fact, in Soufrière. I should say, you cannot get accreditation, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this, Mr. Speaker, is extremely shocking, Mr. Speaker, because they boasted about having a cabinet of sports, former sports and national athletes. Mr. Speaker, the former Minister of Culture was a former national athlete. But while all these atrocities was going on, was too busy pushing a Belrose doctrine and defending the egregious notion that colonization had a conscience. While this is going on in Soufrière, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the former member for Grosley was a former 400-meter runner, national, and he couldn't tell them about that D. And this could not go on there, Mr. Speaker. But it was busy. Mr. Speaker, the former Minister of Sports was a former 100-meter athlete, once described as faster than a bullet from a gun. And so Starbatch ran him out of Denry, faster than a bullet of a gun. Yeah. So, Mr. Speaker, I will excuse the former mayor who played predominantly cricket, as I was told, because he somehow proved his delusion by believing he could unseat a former Prime Minister and member for Viewfort South. And so I'll excuse him, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, all this was happening. He was good in cricket? Okay. Respect. Mr. Speaker, all of this was happening while the member for Soufrière at the time, all of this was happening under his nose. And at that time, he came into this honorable house and he spoke about the member for Castries. He spoke more than 44 minutes, 46 minutes. 46 minutes and 24 seconds while this is happening in the community of Soufrière, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, all this was happening while he was frustrating the people of Grosley by trying to allow this monstrosity on the Queen's chain. Mr. Speaker, they have placed this long jump pit on the D, which gives the athletes very limited space to complete a successful jump, whether you're in triple jump or you're in long jump, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, millions of dollars have to be found now by this administration to correct this error, Mr. Speaker. So sad. Mr. Speaker, all this is while we have a young man, I'm not sure you can call him young again, from Conway, Twatide, who could have easily said to these individuals, this is not a correct way to build a stadium. But they spend that money on Don Lockerbie. But, Mr. Speaker, thank God the people of Soufrière opened their eyes, Mr. Speaker. Thank God. And they decided to go another direction. Because let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, the member for Soufrière that we currently have has more energy than all of us here put together, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, she gets it, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I sometimes wonder if she works out more than me. She probably does, and I'm sure it's not yoga. Because the energy she brings to the people of Soufrière is so admirable. All the time she calling you. And today, I can report that under her recommendation, we brought in Nehemiah A. St. Jean to manage this facility, and he has done wonders, Mr. Speaker. The electrical issues have been dealt with. The goals have been installed. The curbing has landed in St. Lucia, and he is waiting for the nets that will be provided by CPL for a cricket program along the sides of that venue, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, with the facilities management and maintenance policy, the ministry has also hired 2 other facility managers who will be responsible for doing their facility assessments and developments in a responsible way around the island. And it's with this in mind, Mr. Speaker, that we are going to ensure that we institute a naming rights policy. Mr. Speaker, this policy will ensure that facilities around the island can be monetized to assist the ministry with their upkeep. This policy will be a guide for how the ministry goes about allowing corporate St. Lucia to invest in the facilities in the long term and in the short term in exchange for the use of their name at the facility, Mr. Speaker. And so now, if Flow decides to adopt the ancillary playing field, it can be called the Flow Ancillary Playing Field. If Digicel decides to invest in the Choiseul or Lafargue playing field, we can have the Digicel sponsored, and every time it's announced, Lafargue playing field, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, not forgetting the Corinth playing field, if Bryson Company sponsors and ensures that they maintain the Corinth playing field, we can call it the Bryson Company Corinth playing field. Hint, hint. Mr. Speaker, With this policy, Mr. Speaker, we are expecting to ensure that any commercialization around the facility is used to ensure that the facility continues to develop, Mr. Speaker. This is the direction that we are going, Mr. Speaker, with our facilities in this great nation. Mr. Speaker, we are aware that development programs cannot reach their full potential between the hours of when people leave work at 5 o'clock and 6:30 when it gets dark. And so, Mr. Speaker, we have to ensure that we deal with the cost of electricity bills, or we deal with this situation at our facilities around the island. Mr. Speaker, due to the cost of increased electricity bills, coupled with St. Lucia's desire to move away from fossil fuel to limit our carbon footprint, the Ministry of Sports will be undertaking to ensure that the construction of our new facilities will be integrated with the installation of solar energy. And so, Mr. Speaker, as we get the National Aquatic Center underway, I have commenced the engagement of Lucia to chart the way forward on an integrated approach to providing energy at that facility. Mr. Speaker, we see in our allocation that the community of Bellevue Viewfort is poised to see construction work on the playing field. Viewfort North. Mr. Speaker, not only does this community deserve a proper surface, but efforts must be made to ensure that the likes of Naomi London can train in the evening while not worrying about an exorbitant bill, Mr. Speaker. The adjoining court next to the field will also be considered for this solar intervention. Mr. Speaker, this year's budget will also be commencing some work at the Dennery playing field, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hear my compatriots saying again. Mr. Speaker, I attended a semi-final game between Grosley and Dennery at the Dennery playing field, and I said to my comrade that if they win this game, they're not getting nothing. But, Mr. Speaker, the pressure by all those who stood there and watched 2 football matches really, really dawned on me that we need to do something. Mr. Speaker, like Dennery North, this is a community that absolutely thrives on sports. This is a community that is built on their love and passion for sports. And so, Mr. Speaker...
Member for Grosley, would you like to place on record who won that match?
Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the ball went through my goalkeeper's legs in a very unfortunate way, and Grosley lost that game 1-0. So sad. But the member for Canaries, I'm coming to you. The member for Canaries has indicated that he will seek sweet revenge for me when that final is played on Sunday, May 1st at the Viewfort Stadium, Philip Master grounds. But Mr. Speaker, in order to deal with the exorbitant monthly costs of water, Mr. Speaker, Sports St. Lucia Inc. has been charged with the responsibility of developing a system for rainwater harvesting, Mr. Speaker, while small solar pumps can be installed to do the basics like flushing the toilets at the Darren Sami and maintaining the grounds. This will ensure that millions can be saved at our facilities. Mr. Speaker, lighting of facilities continue to be a heavy priority for this government. Mr. Speaker, the Leclerc playing field, Mr. Speaker, has been deemed for a very long time. And so slight adjustments to this lighting system has been warranted by Leclerc's rise to absolute prominence in football in St. Lucia once again, Mr. Speaker. And I'm sure the member for Castries North is very elated about their progress, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Larry Seuss Court, Mr. Speaker, intervention has begun in ensuring we have LED lights at the Larry Seuss Court, Mr. Speaker. The Labrie playing field, the Cicero Court, Mr. Speaker, the Wen playing field in Monrepo, Mr. Speaker, is another popular playing field that has bred some of the best cricketers in St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. And so we'll continue to seek the resources to ensure that this development is instituted, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government has invested $10 million in the youth economy. This will provide the avenue for young men and women to turn their skills and hobbies in sports, in all sports-related entrepreneurial activities. The ministry continues to partner with sporting organizations towards the semi-professionalization of sports in this country, Mr. Speaker. Consultation with the inclusion of former national football player and coach Earl Bollock-Jr. and Stuart Charles Favre continues, Mr. Speaker, as we seek to ensure that we can compensate our players, our coaches, sports photographers, editors, and the likes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, every single constituency can benefit from this intervention in sports and in entrepreneurial activities, Mr. Speaker. This is the vision of the member for Castries East, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's a lot of work ongoing with the president of the St. Lucia Football Association to ensure that we can semi-professionalize the sport, Mr. Speaker. And I'm very glad, Mr. Speaker, that the ambassador of the People's Republic of China, Taiwan, has started the communication with the Taiwan Football Association to see us through in equipment and logistics for the semi-professionalization of football in St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, look at what I like that. Mr. Speaker, the establishment of a diaspora association for sports is very important, Mr. Speaker. We have a number of former national players, Premier League players around the world who have gear at their households, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we must find and charge that association with the responsibility of putting it together and sending it to St. Lucia for our young people, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, we continue to work in the Ministry of Sports. Mr. Speaker, the comorbidity rate of death in this country requires this government to take a deeper look at ensuring that there is a better synergy between the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Sports, Mr. Speaker. The prevalence of non-communicable diseases such as hypertension and diabetes, it requires partnerships in building a healthier St. Lucia. And so, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Sports plans to continue a relationship with the NIC for the construction of 4 new outdoor gyms around the St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. The assessment of the communities of Miku, Soufrière, Vieux-Fort, VG will continue, Mr. Speaker, to establish the outdoor gyms, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is not enough to merely establish this commodity. And so, Mr. Speaker, the policy of this ministry will be to require coaches employed with the ministry to do at least 30-minute sessions with communities free of charge at these facilities, Mr. Speaker. In fighting this disease, Mr. Speaker, the ministry will also train coaches in ensuring fitness classes are instituted for the middle-aged and the elderly in our communities, Mr. Speaker. Very important in fighting the scourge. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Youth and Sports will also foster deeper ties with the Ministry of Education. Dealing with hypertension and diabetes must start at an earlier age, Mr. Speaker. As the Minister of Youth Development and Sports, I am deeply concerned that our young people are not moving enough, Mr. Speaker. And they are gaining weight at an earlier age, Mr. Speaker. As such, this ministry will partner with the Ministry of Education and Health to bring back some of the fun activities in schools that promote physical activity, Mr. Speaker. We intend to partner with other concerned citizens to institute programs in skipping rope, jump rope, and competing in hopscotch and double dutch as we used to when we were younger, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, something has to be done to get our people moving, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, physical literacy has to begin at infant and primary school. It is my opinion that we teach physical education, which focuses more on kicking and throwing, but play pay scant regard to actual physical literacy, because there's a difference. You see, Mr. Speaker, physical literacy deals with the healthy development of the whole person. And we see most times that physical education, it deals largely with movements, Mr. Speaker. And so we have to start to educate our young people about healthier lifestyles in eating, healthier lifestyles in moving, including, Mr. Speaker, and I'll continue to say it, my time in India really changed my life. Healthy meditation and yoga, Mr. Speaker. These things we need to teach our children earlier, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, even as we discuss physical literacy at schools, it is important for me to articulate the Ministry of Sports policy direction as it pertains to our annual school sports events, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in order for this nation to catch up with the times, Mr. Speaker, our annual inter-house activities must be viewed in terms of inter-house as participation. Mr. Speaker, you want everybody to participate in your inter-house competition, everybody, as most of us would have at some point. Therefore, the idea is to get as many as possible our kids to actually participate. But Mr. Speaker, when it comes to inter-school, the thrust has to be on competition. This is how it is done in other countries. The inter-school competition is not based on everybody participating, but the actual athletes competing. And so, Mr. Speaker, for an inter-school competition, let's just say in track and field, to go anywhere in this country, we must start having standards. We must. And Mr. Speaker, you cannot tell me that you want to compete in the 100 meters at inter-school on national TV for the world to see, and in 100 meters you cannot run 13 seconds, Mr. Speaker. And because you won at your school running 13 seconds, you there on a big occasion finishing last barefooted at inter-schools competition, Mr. Speaker. We have to up the standards. And so, Mr. Speaker, with our ministry, we are setting standards of pre-qualifications for these inter-schools competitions. And Mr. Speaker, when you start that process, you are able to, and hear me out, then have a final that is truncated on a Sunday afternoon, Mr. Speaker. I'm going there, Mr. Speaker, because I have heard from some of my colleagues that they have tried it in times past to get the principals and the coaches to buy in, the parents to buy in to the final of inter-school on a Sunday afternoon. And Mr. Speaker, I cannot, as sports minister, know that we cannot continue to develop inter-schools competitions during the week. I cannot, as a youth minister, understand that we need participation during the week and on the weekends, sit idly by and say, this is how it's always been. I cannot do it, Mr. Speaker. I cannot. So, Mr. Speaker, we must have qualifying standards and get those who have met these qualifying standards to participate in the finals on that day. So, Mr. Speaker, there is a format that we have recommended for schools' sports competitions, particularly as it pertains to track and field, Mr. Speaker. We are proposing, Mr. Speaker, that all students continue to participate in inter-house competitions. Only the students during these inter-house competitions that actually meet the qualifying standards get to the semifinals of the inter-school competition that is normally held during the week. Mr. Speaker, after having the semifinal on a Monday in the north, on a Tuesday in the south, those individuals that make it to the final will be invited to participate only in the final, Mr. Speaker. And so, by doing this way, you will limit the amount of actual athletes participating in inter-schools competitions on a Sunday afternoon. It allows you to have a straight finals in the 100 meters, 200 meters, 400 meters, 800 meters, perhaps a high jump event, a long jump event, and Mr. Speaker, have a truncated activity for 2 hours, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, The ministry has started the consultation with the Ministry of Education, with some of the coaches, and they are starting to see that we need to move in this direction, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we cannot say that we are serious about the development of school sports and expect serious results by doing the madness we've been doing year in, year out. Mr. Speaker, what the ministry recommends will provide more parental involvement, Mr. Speaker, on that final day, more community involvement, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, more corporate involvement in sports, Mr. Speaker. Let's say the truth. We don't get buy-in into our inter-secondary schools competition because corporate St. Lucia does not see value for their money. You have empty stands. You have people at work, Mr. Speaker. How do you then justify going to Blue Waters and Crystal Clear and tell them to sponsor your activities, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, you... I don't think so. Mr. Speaker, there will be higher prestige in making the finals, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as it currently stands, anybody can, and we need to focus on the athletes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there will be more global exposure for the athletes because of a better production, Mr. Speaker. Way better production. Because, Mr. Speaker, when you know the 8 finalists from the Tuesday, I can go to NBC or to Winners TV and give them the list of every one of those athletes and tell them that between now and Sunday, the final, to get their pictures, to put their information, their times run, their fastest time. And on that day, Mr. Speaker, because of a truncated event, we can have a quality production that schools in the United States, England, and Canada can comfortably watch for 2 hours, Mr. Speaker. This is the direction we must consider as it pertains to school sports, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we must be willing to move the needle, Mr. Speaker. We must be willing to move, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in terms of school sports, Mr. Speaker, it is my belief that by Form 3, every child in this nation should be able to swim, Mr. Speaker. Should be able to swim, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've had much discussion about the establishment of a 50-meter pool and what will happen with the aquatic center in Rodney. And so, Mr. Speaker, we need to continue to have discussions on ensuring that secondary schools can gain access to the Rodney Heights Aquatic Center for development plans and teaching our young people in schools to swim, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is very sad that every now and then we hear in this rock of an island surrounded by water that young people, Mr. Speaker, drown. So, Mr. Speaker, we need to make it a policy that we get this thing done, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with this in mind, and the development of swimming desperately needed in the South, the current president of the Swimming Association, Eddie Hazel, and the parliamentary rep for Viewfort South, they have secured lands for the construction of a 25-meter pool in the south of this island, Mr. Speaker. We'll ensure that the people in the South can also effect the development program for competition, and while the young people learn to swim, Mr. Speaker. Very important, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've also secured, Mr. Speaker, and Mr. Speaker, the sport of basketball has been a sport that is a very curious sport for me as a sports minister. It is still one of the most popular sports in St. Lucia. There's a court in every community, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, for the first time, the St. Lucia Basketball Federation, they've actually identified a technical director to develop the sport of basketball in this country, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very excited about that, Mr. Speaker. And so, we have identified some sponsors of 2 3x3 courts for basketball in St. Lucia, one in the north and one in the south of the island, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government believes in the engagement of young people at their level. As a result, we have identified a alternative sports or non-traditional sports desk at our ministry, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have a lot of young people, and I would say the sum total of those who are interested in alternative sports may be more than those interested in football, Mr. Speaker. We have a lot of young people that are interested in esports, video gaming, Mr. Speaker, BMX riding, Mr. Speaker, car racing, sound clashes, Mr. Speaker, darts, off-road racing, outdoor gymming, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the development and structuring of an alternative sports department, Mr. Speaker, is very important. A government that takes what young people like seriously will yield way more results than one that forces them to like what they have not liked forever, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, we are in the process of sending out invitations, Mr. Speaker, so that we can identify a consultant for the development of alternative sports on this island, Mr. Speaker. We have identified a season when we see more alternative sports, including bike racing in this country, Mr. Speaker, from National Day, December 14th, to Independence Day, February 22nd, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, I've held many meetings with the car racers. They used to use the Kakabeth. And when I hear how much these individuals have been displaced, it really hurts. DSH have displaced them. And so the identification of a home for car racing is high on our priority. So the strategy for the development of alternative sports, creation of the alternative sports desk with a consultant at the ministry, identify or develop a database of interested persons on island in the alternative sports, formulate a development program in the community and in schools in alternative sports, institute a yearly program of competition which will be culminated December 13th to February 22nd. Mr. Speaker, the young people of this nation have waited for a youth policy, Mr. Speaker. Similar to the women who waited for a domestic violence bill, they have been on the sidelines waiting and waiting and waiting for this youth policy. Mr. Speaker, I am proud to stand here today and say that the wait is finally coming to an end, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in times past, the Ministry of Youth Development and Sports finalized a draft national youth policy with funding from Commonwealth. The draft policy, it actually articulates the framework for the development of young people. Mr. Speaker, the vision of the policy states, and I quote,
Member for Grizzly, you have 15 minutes left.
I'll soldier on, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the youth policy comprises 9 priority goals and actions, and one of these actions include economic participation. Where have you heard that before for young people? A youth economy, Mr. Speaker. And so, in January 2022, the ministry finalized the draft action plan to assist with the implementation of this draft policy. This draft contains the following 3 implementation principles: embracing human rights-based approach, social inclusion, inclusive of the active youth participation. Mr. Speaker, these 2 documents will help create an enabling environment to further the ministry's quest for positive youth development in this nation. Mr. Speaker, the member for Castries East ensured that the NYC got an increase in their subvention, and I can say finally, 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 Mr. Speaker. And so the Ministry of Youth Development and Sports will ensure that we continue to ensure that we have deeper ties with the National Youth Council, Mr. Speaker. We propose structural quarterly meetings with the Council. We've increased their subvention and we'll continue to evaluate that subvention, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to announce that on May 11th and 12th, we will see the return of Youth Parliament in this nation, Mr. Speaker. This is a welcomed event that we all can look forward to. But Mr. Speaker, the young people, they are asking for more Youth Parliament, Mr. Speaker. They want different occasions to be able to come and have debates on what's happening in this great nation. And so we will be working with the NYC to accomplish just that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in our ministry, we also have a school leavers program, youth service corps, Mr. Speaker. The program, Mr. Speaker, is largely with the public sector, employing 140 young persons. Mr. Speaker, with this program, every year about 2,000 young people leave secondary school, leave tertiary level education, and come back from college, Mr. Speaker. And so most of the times, they are not equipped with a resume that has enough information. Mr. Speaker, with this program, we give them an opportunity to work with an establishment for a year. Mr. Speaker, we are now considering working with startup business that would fall under the youth economy and see if we can partner with the Ministry of the Youth Economy to split at least the first year compensation for the young school leavers, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've also instituted the 758 Youth Connect program. And one of the programs, the Honorable Member for Castries East attended the very first episode, the Hot Topic Lounge called the Crossroads, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this will provide a virtual space for all, Mr. Speaker. For those who are musicians, Mr. Speaker, virtual space for the athletes, and the next episode will feature the athletes from Carifta, Mr. Speaker. A virtual space for discussions on the youth economy, on ideas, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, we're very excited about this opportunity to hear our young people speak, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our music program by Shiryan Cyril, Mr. Speaker, is one that we will expand to ensure that more communities, more of our voices, our melodious voices are heard, Mr. Speaker. Very excited about this, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Skilled St. Lucia app, Mr. Speaker. Very excited about the ministry's development of a digital space targeted at dealing with unemployment. I am indeed excited about the upcoming launch of Skilled St. Lucia, an app that will benefit not just young people, but the wider society. The app will have a number of things going on, Mr. Speaker. It will create a database of unemployed people, including electricians, plumbers, carpenters, Mr. Speaker, painters, even dancers, singers, musicians, Mr. Speaker. All will be encouraged to let their skills, their talents, their CVs be placed on this platform, Mr. Speaker. It will ensure that there is geolocation, Mr. Speaker. This will tell us, the region and the world, exactly where our skills are, where they are available, Mr. Speaker. It will provide an avenue for collaboration with the Ministry of Education for training programs in TVET, Mr. Speaker. It will provide that guidance to strengthen these individuals that have perceived weaknesses on their CVs, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with this established, we are hoping that a gig economy will be formulated under our youth economy, Mr. Speaker. When you speak to young people, they tell you, I have a skill, but I don't want to work particularly for any company. They tell you, I work 5 days for this company, and I make this amount of money. With my skill, working for myself, with my gig, I can work twice and make that money, Mr. Speaker. And so the identification of these people are very important. We are truly working hard for these people, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me once again thank the people of Grosley for their patience during the most difficult time of our country. Most difficult time our country has ever faced, Mr. Speaker. Let me thank the people of Granivier, who has seen contract after contract awarded for the completion of their court, yet still thousands of dollars later, their court is only 40% complete. Let me thank the people of Marisol Corinth for their patience. These people have stood by and have seen lights go up around the country, while every program imaginable is done on their playing field during the day. Let me thank the people of Moshi for their patience, as they have been promised time and time again lights on their field with zero follow-up. Mr. Speaker, let me thank the people of Grosley Town, who year after year have to run away from the Grosley playing field when it rains, because in the entire history of the most densely populated community in the OECS, they have never ever been given a stands with covering, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the youth of this nation is talented, and they should never be made to feel that the government has given up on them. This is why, Mr. Speaker, I have started my discussions with the young people in the inner cities. I also want to thank the staff at the Ministry of Youth Development and Sports who have worked tirelessly to see better intervention on behalf of our youth. The Permanent Secretary, Mrs. Caroline Eugene, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Mrs. Leota Shalmine Mason, Director of Youth, Miss Mary Wilfred, corrected by the member for Dennery North, Director of Sports, Mr. Patrick Maffrey at the time, and new Sports Director, Mr. Jim Xavier, and the rest of my staff for their efforts. Mr. Speaker, I have made it a policy to meet young people in their communities. Last week, I visited the communities of Grass Street, Wilton's Yard, commonly known as the Graveyard, and Conway. Mr. Speaker, young people on the blocks have some of the best ideas. I come into Masha and Cicero, relax. These people have some of the best ideas, Mr. Speaker. It is not enough to hear them and not respond, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, they want to see the ministry form deeper partnerships with Venus Cherry and Rice St. Lucia for the return of the Peace Futsal League, this time on a national scale. And so, this ministry will do all in its power to stay connected with them to better their situation. Mr. Speaker, we have a lot of work to do. But this MP for the best constituency on the planet and Minister for Youth Development and Sports is here, Mr. Speaker. I'm here to stay, Mr. Speaker. And I'm here to serve our people, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I endorse this appropriations bill, Mr. Speaker, and look forward to continuing to develop our young people in youth and sports. I thank you.
The member for Soufrière Fossé-Jacques.
Mr. Speaker, I rise with thanksgiving in my heart to the Almighty for his many graces and blessings and the opportunity to contribute to the debate on the Appropriation Bill 2022-23 presented by the Minister of Finance and the member for Castries East, a bill which I support. Mr. Speaker, with your permission, let me start by expressing gratitude to the people of Soufrière Fossé-Jacques for the confidence they continue to place in me. I'm also thankful to them for the manner in which they embrace our political leader and Prime Minister, the Honorable Philip J. Pierre, and the response to the St. Lucia Labour Party's position in putting the people first. You, the people, through you, Mr. Speaker, you, the people of Soufrière Fossé-Jacques, have placed your confidence in me, and I will continue to commit to serve you with humility and purpose. To the leader, to our great leader, the Honorable Prime Minister, I thank you for sticking with experience, resilience, and commitment. Mr. Speaker, I stand in a unique position in this chamber in having the opportunity to have represented two constituencies, Grosile and Soufrière. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to take this moment to thank my Grosile team, which continue up to this day to provide support. And I want to say thank you to Team Soufrière. I don't want the names are several, are many. So today I want to express my gratitude to all my group members, all my cell members, all my community members, to the Barons Drive community, my family, siblings here and abroad, my prayer warriors. Amen. I want to thank you so much for your invaluable support and constant feedback and criticism. This helps me to remain focused on mission. And that mission is working together to transform Soufrière-Fauché-Jacques. I want to take this moment, Mr. Speaker, because I'm in a unique position in the Soufrière constituency where we have the Soufrière Regional Development Foundation and as well as the Soufrière Marine Management Authority. I want to take this moment to thank the board and staff of these institutions for the support that they provide. I want to thank the mayor and councillors of the Soufrière Constituency Council. Without them, I cannot deliver on what is happening in the constituency. To the Ministry of Commerce Strategic Partners, a big thank you for your cooperation and support. And I want to outline a bit, because whatever we are doing in business, we cannot do it, Mr. Speaker, without the board and staff of Export St. Lucia, board and staff of the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards, board and staff of the Free Zone, the Cooperative League, the credit unions, the various cooperatives and friendly societies, the Chamber of Commerce, SLISBA, St. Lucia Manufacturers Association, Coalition of Services, St. Lucia Fashion Council, the Bakers Association, and the other industry groups and associations. Mr. Speaker, I want to take this moment here before I delve into the work of my ministry to also add a word of appreciation to the Ambassador Chen of the Embassy of China, Taiwan. I want to personally thank him for the support that he has continually provided to my ministry and to the business community, Mr. Speaker, and by St. Lucia, and by extension, St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, to the Permanent Secretary and staff of the Ministry of Commerce, they continue to work in the development and advancement of St. Lucia, and I extend heartfelt thank you. Mr. Speaker, in July last year, St. Lucians had the opportunity to choose between two fundamentally different visions on how to grow our country. They had to choose between the regime of the United Workers' Party that depicted waste, inefficiency, and corruption versus the promise made by the St. Lucia Labour Party of putting the people of St. Lucia first. The people of St. Lucia chose hope over fear, prosperity over stagnation. They chose a government that promised to do a few things. One, to rescue our economy from an economic and financial disaster, restore St. Lucia to a level of stability, and create an enabling environment for wealth creation and employment, particularly among the women and youth. A government who believes in inclusivity, that each one of us is equal and should be given an equal opportunity. A government who believes in sustainable policies and not quick fix. Mr. Speaker, 9 months to the day after this election victory, when the people of St. Lucia made a decisive and resounding endorsement of the policies of the St. Lucia Labour Party, the Minister for Finance and our Prime Minister had the opportunity to articulate the policy framework of his government for the year 2022-23 under the theme transforming the economy and empowering our people. And this is what we promised, Mr. Speaker, and now we are making good on that promise. We are delivering a new beginning, a new hope, new aspiration, and this new tomorrow through another theme, du vent ensemble, working with our youth, women, single mothers, micro, small, medium and large businesses, manufacturers, cooperative societies, farmers, fishers, service providers, vendors, retirees, civil servants, policemen, nurses, doctors, teachers, firefighters, members of the Rastafarian movement, minibus operators, hoteliers, landowners, Mr. Speaker, supporters of Flabo, supporters of Labour, supporters of Green Party, and those with no party. This, the blue wave, sorry. This is your moment. This is your moment to transform your tomorrow. This is your moment to transform your community. This is your moment to transform our country. Let us seize this moment and let us thank God for this moment. Mr. Speaker, for our youth, I welcome our youth economy program with an allocation of $10 million, which for the first time will provide critical capital and technical support needed to start their own businesses. Young people, this is your moment to turn your skills and hobbies into businesses. This is your moment to make your dreams a reality. This is your moment to work with others to turn ideas into million-dollar enterprises. This is your moment to provide your goods and services to the world. This is your moment. The next move is in your hands. For our women, our single mothers with all the skills at baking, cooking, sewing, creating body rubs for their children, this is your moment. We at the Ministry of Commerce, for the first time, have an allocation of $10 million to work with you and to give you this much needed start. This is your moment. Keep tuned in for the details. Mr. Speaker, for our small business owners, our vendors, our service providers who are experiencing all sorts of operational problems, rent not paid, staff on half pay, stock cannot be repurchased. Those who cannot purchase this much needed computer, this is your moment. Please visit our small enterprise development unit at the Ministry of Commerce to be part of this new beginning. Get your businesses registered. Be part of the training and technical program. And yes, see how you can benefit from this $10 million micro, small, and medium-sized enterprise loan grant program. This is your moment. For our large businesses that are experiencing myriad of problems, cash flow issues, high freight costs, low turnover, reduce profits. This is your moment. Yes, this is your moment to work with this government to bring some relief to our consumers. While our dialogue continues on the modality of some of your relief, this Minister of Finance, this government, is giving you a generous tax relief. Yes, this is your moment. Benefit from the interest and penalty waivers while our conversation continues. Mr. Speaker, to our fishers and farmers, this is your moment to ramp up our food production and feed our people and contribute to food security of our nation. My Foshejak farmers, and with your permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll speak to them in Creole at this moment. Jodia, moi vle di ou comment ka parler au Parlement. Moi savent nous hani en chaque conversation ces femmes à Foshejak là. Moi savent ou j'ai parlé bon moi et puis dis moi qualité tristesse ou ni. Ou besoin l'argent pour fertiliser. Ou besoin moun pour aider au planter. Ou quand une difficulté et puis qualité problème non quand y a présent. Ou quand ouais faille d'achine n'a qu'à venir jaune. Ou j'ai ouais moi à venir parler avec vous, ministre agricole qu'a parler avec vous. Mais aujourd'hui l'écoutez ça nous qu'a dit gouvernement ou mettez en place pour représenter là. Premier ministre là ou électé premier ministre là Philippe J. Pierre. Aujourd'hui ça nous qu'a discuté c'est qui manière nous caïdo et puis un programme dans budget là nous ni là nous a mis en provision pour $1 million 1.1 million pour aider aux affaires fertilizer. Ça c'est gouvernement ou électé et qu'à présent nous qu'a fait ça nous dit nous qu'a faire nous qu'a aider farmers. Mr. Speaker, Foshejak farmers, this is your moment to plant. Miku farmers, this is your moment to plant more bananas. The input support, the fertilizer, the farm labor support is coming. Mr. Speaker, to our civil servants, our police officers, our nurses, our teachers, our firefighters, our doctors, this is your moment. As we acknowledge your sterling support and contribution to the well-being of our people and our economy, this is your moment as you benefit from a salary increase from this government. Mr. Speaker, I understand that this is already processed and ready for payment. This is your moment as thousands of you benefit from this new tax reform package, especially the threshold where $25,000 of your salary would be exempt from taxation. This is your moment, as this presents you with more disposable income, which you can use at your discretion. Also, this is your moment to increase your productivity. This is your moment to improve your customer service. This is your moment to work together with the private sector to transform our economy. Mr. Speaker, to the members of the cooperative movement, this is your moment where the strong must support the weak. Credit unions, this is your moment to embrace international standards, yet at the same time remaining true to your cooperative philosophy. Fisher cooperatives and farmer cooperatives, this is your moment to embrace sound business practices. This is your moment to review your entire operations to bring new energy into the movement. This is your moment for better governance and member participation. Mr. Speaker, as we speak on cooperatives, I am very encouraged by the last meeting that the Minister of Agriculture and I held with the Fisher cooperatives. And I will speak on this a little later. both the Minister of Agriculture and I are committed to transforming both the agro and fishing industry. We are looking at intense training, technical support, solarization as a cost-cutting measure for the fishers. This is your moment. You can benefit from two envelopes, $10 million from the Micro and Small Medium Program within the Ministry of Commerce, as well as $6.135 million at the Ministry of Agriculture. CMOS farmers, some $300,000 is included in there. Cocoa farmers, $1.4 million. Mushrooms, $385. Bananas, $950,000. Because of your structure, you can also seek assistance from donor agencies and sister cooperatives. This is your moment. To our retirees, you are a reservoir of skills and knowledge. This is your moment to come forward individually or in groups to turn these assets into revenue for yourselves by selling and sharing your skills and knowledge with youth. Yes, Mr. Speaker, this is the moment for the retirees. Again, I say, please visit us at the Ministry of Commerce. Sit down, share your ideas. We have a technical team that is willing and able to assist. Mr. Speaker, to the members of the Rastafarian community, this is your moment for inclusion. This is your moment at the decision-making table. This is your moment to benefit from the economic benefits of cannabis. Yes, this is your moment for a new tomorrow. A tomorrow where we respect the space of others. A tomorrow where we protect our children and youth from the use and abuse of the home. Yes, this is your moment. Let us work together to shape the cannabis industry and by extension to improve the economy of our country. Rasta, this is your moment. Yes. Mr. Speaker, from the programs outlined by the Minister of Finance and the measures which I have just emphasized, you will realize that as a government, despite all the turmoil, despite COVID-19, despite the inheritance of an empty treasury, despite the war between Ukraine and Russia, yes, I will repeat, despite the inheritance of an empty treasury, despite the inheritance of an empty treasury, despite the rising price of fuel, we are not cowering. We have not taken a defeatist attitude. Instead, Mr. Speaker, we have taken bold measures because we have confidence in our people to chart our own destiny. After all, Mr. Speaker, we are a country with two Nobel laureates. Our greatest asset is our people. And this appropriation bill is aimed at unleashing the potential of our people. It is aimed at empowering our people and transforming our economy. This is our moment, Mr. Speaker, to transform our country. So, Mr. Speaker, our economy, like most economies of the world, has weakened as a consequence of the various conflicts among nations, COVID-19, climate change, but more specifically to ours was the issue of greed and irresponsibility on the part of the last administration. Mr. Speaker, the demolishing of structures, new and old, the wastage of resources, the duplication of efforts, the continuous madi-puete, all contributed to where we are now. All contributed to where we are now. So I'm the first to say the challenges we face today are many. Crime, high cost of doing business, high cost of energy, high cost of food, youth unemployment, they are all troubling. But I'm also eager to say that the opportunities are many. Mr. Speaker, these challenges create opportunities for all who are willing to work and to look beyond the current hardships and work together for the advancement of this 238 square mile, which we call home. This is our moment to restore good governance. This is our moment to trust St. Lucians again. And this is our moment to put St. Lucians first. So, Mr. Speaker, what is my ministry's role in this new tomorrow? Mr. Speaker, upon assuming the role at the Ministry for Commerce, my first order of business was to meet with the various umbrella groups to first express my appreciation to them for creating opportunities for employment during this difficult period and for remaining resilient in the fight against this COVID-19. Their determination to persevere during this crisis has been exemplary. My task as minister was to connect with the private sector and consumers and see how we could chart the way forward together. Mr. Speaker, during my interaction with the business community, I listened as they recalled the hardship of the past year, the inability to meet loan payments and other commitments, and the unavailability and rising cost of inputs and goods due to shipping logistics, to name a few. Many small businesses continue to struggle with the uncertainty of how to take care of their employees as the developments around them threaten their survival. I want to say to the business community that as a business owner myself, I understand your struggles, and I know that many of you have felt alone in your struggles. Many of you have reached out to the government and did not receive the comfort and support that you thought you needed. Mr. Speaker, I want to reassure the business community that we will work to restore the trust between the private sector and the government. You have my commitment that through our ongoing internal reforms and programs to bolster economic growth and improve the ease of doing business climate, businesses in St. Lucia will not only succeed, but thrive. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to take this moment to personally thank the Honorable Prime Minister for hearing the cry of the business community and for the first time placing $10 million in the envelope for the Ministry of Commerce to work with the business community. I want to thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the business community, I continue, for as a government, we understand that as much as we do and should do, it is ultimately the business community upon which we rely that will determine our fate. It is the willingness of business owners to put in the extra work to ensure that employees get paid at the end of the month. The additional investment to ensure the safety of customers and staff. The additional hours to ensure that the goods and services which they provide are available to customers. Lest we forget that this global pandemic demonstrated our global fragility. However, moving forward, this fragility should require unity and solidarity because we are a resilient people, an inspiring community, and a strong nation. Mr. Speaker, as we hear the cries of our business owners, the cost of inputs has skyrocketed. Yet in many cases, they have maintained their full staff complements. Because these small businesses understand the impact of the operations, they understand how they impact households. I would like to say thank you to that business community for partnering with us in keeping the ship afloat through this difficult period. Mr. Speaker, the manufacturing sector has expanded by 4.3% in 2021 from a contraction of negative 0.4% in 2020. The wholesale and retail trade has increased by 9.5% from a contraction of negative 21.1% in 2020. Mr. Speaker, these sectors have done their part, and we will continue to collaborate to navigate the future together. Mr. Speaker, we are pleased to inform our businesses that help is ahead. Under the MSME loan grant scheme, qualified small businesses will receive hybrid financing, including a 70% grant towards approved business costs and a 30% unsecured loan component offered at concessionary rates. Mr. Speaker, some 600 small businesses are expected to benefit from this program in the first instance, with the loan repayment portion set to be reinvested in support of additional small businesses, making this somewhat of a revolving fund. Spearheaded by the Ministry of Commerce, the grant loan scheme is at an advanced stage of planning and will be financed by EC $10 million loan from the Caribbean Development Bank. Mr. Speaker, the program objective is to facilitate the recovery of small businesses within targeted productive sectors and to further develop resilience among them through targeted technical support aimed at developing financial and management skills, adopting national and international standards, and penetrating domestic and international markets. The project foresees increased productive capacity among small businesses and improvements in quality standards and overall competitiveness. Mr. Speaker, approximately 800 persons in the manufacturing sector, including agro-processing and service sector, and in particular women, will benefit from this intervention. This grant and loan fund is an injection into our St. Lucian-grown businesses, which will allow them to invest in capital and purchase raw material and direct input for the businesses. It is anticipated that this initiative will help create approximately 1,300 jobs and provide up to 15 new firms the opportunity to export per year. Mr. Speaker, a young American poet, young Pablo, said, and I quote, "Friends who hold visions of your success as their own are a blessing." Mr. Speaker, today I want to say to the people of St. Lucia that Ambassador Chen and his team at the Embassy of China, Taiwan, and this government both share the ideology that entrepreneurship is the engine of growth. And this is a blessing. The Taiwanese government has made a donation of EC $5 million to the Ministry of Finance, of which 1.5 million has been earmarked to undertake projects for women entrepreneurs. Yes, ladies, we are putting you first. The purpose of the project is to assist post-pandemic economic recovery and social stability through a credit guarantee scheme and an employment and entrepreneurship capacity building program. This offers a series of training opportunities and other activities to youth, women, and micro and medium-sized enterprises. The project, Mr. Speaker, has three components. One, vocational skills training of up to 360 individuals across 4 thematic areas, namely hospitality, health aid, digital and creative entrepreneurship, and early childhood development. 2, incubator programs targeting up to 300 startup entrepreneurs. And 3, small business coaching and finance support for up to 90 small businesses. Mr. Speaker, with female unemployment at 23.9%, we cannot continue to ignore this vulnerable group in our society. And I'm committed to working with my colleague Minister of Gender Affairs to ensure that we pay attention to our women. Mr. Speaker, allow me the opportunity to do some marketing offered by the services offered by the Ministry of Commerce. Mr. Speaker, all St. Lucia registered businesses, whether foreign-owned or locally owned, large or small, whether you are a mature business or a new business, it does not matter. If you are a baker, a quarry, a retail shop, or a manufacturing plant, under the Fiscal Incentive and Micro and Small Scale Business Enterprise Act, concessions are available on raw material, equipment, and machinery to qualify businesses. The process is simple. You simply come to the Ministry of Commerce or call a commerce and industry or business development officer, and one will be assigned to you. We encourage you to call or come in so that we can do an assessment and ascertain whether your business qualifies. Mr. Speaker, the business owners have done and continue to do their part. The government is doing its part within its tight fiscal space. However, we cannot do it alone. We are a tripod, and the strongest leg is you, the worker. Employees must realize that we have duties to ourselves, our families, our employers, and our country to show up to work and to give a fair day's work for a fair day's pay. We must increase productivity. We must learn to do more with little, and we must implant in us the spirit, the fruit of honesty and integrity. Now is your moment to ask yourself, what can I do for my country? Then and only then will we be able to bring our nation closer to its potential. Mr. Speaker, enhancing the business environment. As part of the ministry's ongoing effort to improve the business climate and trade facilitation landscape in St. Lucia, the ministry has secured technical support of up to 90 days consultancy from the Investment Climate Reform Facility to undertake a time-release study. The time-release study will measure the actual performance of border procedures, including custom activities, in a systematic and standardized way by measuring the time taken to release or clear goods. Once we have completed the time-release study, Mr. Speaker, we will be able to identify the bottlenecks in the clearance of goods and put measures in place to eliminate these bottlenecks. The establishment and publication of average release times would not only enhance transparency and cross-border trade, but also contribute to enhance border management efficiencies and trade predictabilities. Mr. Speaker, all stakeholders are currently involved in this study, and the culmination of this project is expected in August this year. Mr. Speaker, we cannot rest until our local businesses and foreign investors give us a better rating on our ease of doing business survey. Although discontinued by the World Bank, we at the ministry continue to work towards removing the bottlenecks which impedes the business climate in St. Lucia. The continuation of the digital government services platform, DigiGov, to bring government services online will enhance delivery of government services and allow for seamless integration of cross-departmental functions. The ministry continues to coordinate meetings and discussions with the various key stakeholders, investigating the findings of the Ease of Doing Business report and take decisive action to continually enhance the ease of doing business in St. Lucia. This is your moment, Customs and Excise. This is your moment, Chamber of Commerce. This is your moment, SLASPA. And this is your moment, DigiGov, to work together towards the identification and implementation of an effective and efficient single window system. Mr. Speaker, on the issue of the single window, I have given the business community my commitment that the trade logistic platform will be implemented during my tenure as Minister responsible for commerce. To improve trading across our borders, there is no other way around it but to implement a single window. That single window project has dragged on for far too long. And I believe as long as the key stakeholders work together, we will be able to implement that project. It is a critical project, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, we move from single window and I now want to address the elephant in the room, Mr. Speaker. He's got out. But the elephant in the room, Mr. Speaker, is rising prices. Mr. Speaker, around the world, rising food prices are eroding family budgets. World inflation in 2021 increased by an estimated 4.3%. Inflation from our two main importing countries was 4.3% and 2.1% in 2021 for the US and Trinidad and Tobago respectively. Locally, the story is no different. St. Lucia's inflation was 2.4% in 2021. When compared to prices in 2021, prices in January 2022 were 4.4% higher than January last year. Price increases were recorded in all major categories, Mr. Speaker, namely food and non-alcoholic beverages, housing, water, electricity and gas, clothing and footwear, health and transportation. This government has had a difficult time devising strategies to cushion the impacts of rising prices on the poor amidst an estimated overall deficit of $345 million in the last fiscal year and $394.5 million in this fiscal year. In light of these developments, Mr. Speaker, my government has reviewed and continues to review all options to mitigate against these crises. In this regard, our objective as a government are twofold. One, first, we seek measures that will create an immediate buffer and provide relief to the citizenry, and in particular the most vulnerable segments of our society. These are measures aimed at ensuring economic stability and cushioning the socio-economic impact of current disruption in global trade. Secondly, we seek strategies that are geared to build resilience over the long term, enhancing our food security and reduce our dependence on food imports. Mr. Speaker, in further review of our policy options across two objectives, we will consider those options that are under our direct control and can be implemented in the immediate term. These can be juxtaposed to other medium to long-term policy options that require some assistance with external agencies, given our regional and international trade commitments. Noting the immediate need of consumers and specifically the more vulnerable segments of St. Lucian society, my government is exploring some interim measures. The first one we are looking at is the waiver of a 6% service charge on the import of food, pharmaceuticals, and certain building material and hygiene products. Mr. Speaker, my government understands the impact that COVID-19 has had on households, especially single-parent households. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, while we continue our discussions on how to provide some long-term relief that is impactful, my government will move post-haste in assessing an interim measure whereby customs service charges will be suspended on imports of basic commodities. Mr. Speaker, my government is exploring the suspension of the customs service charge taxes on all pharmaceuticals, because we all know that medicine is critical, as this government considers the health of our citizens as a major priority. Furthermore, considering the plight of the average citizen for adequate housing, Mr. Speaker, we are exploring the possibility of waiving the customs service charge on selected building materials, including lumber, cement, and plywood. This option will reduce the cost on imported goods for our major distributors and retailers. This will translate to cost savings being passed on to the final consumer, because, Mr. Speaker, if we have to consider this option, it must be price control. That is the only way that these reductions that will be satisfied or that we can confirm that any price reductions would reach its desired effect, and that is to reach the consumer. Mr. Speaker, we are also considering removing service charge on all the basic food items which are currently price control items, and deleting the sizes and quantities where specific in the price control order. What this means, Mr. Speaker, is, for example, whereas currently only the small tuna fish, like if we take tuna fish for example, Mr. Speaker, only the small tuna fish can is price control. To minimize price volatility under this new regime, all tuna fish, large and small, will now be placed under price control, Mr. Speaker. This is what putting people first means, Mr. Speaker. Some basic items that a household consumes. Other areas that we're looking at: chicken backs, chicken legs, chicken wings, chicken products will become a bit more affordable to the average St. Lucian under this option. Mr. Speaker, another option on the table is the possibility of reducing the shipping freight to pre-COVID levels on all containerized inputs as an option to provide reprieve to all sectors. Mr. Speaker, the cost of shipping a 20-foot container from China to St. Lucia, for example, has moved from US $4,000 prior to COVID to now US $14,000, Mr. Speaker. From US $4,000 to US $14,000, Mr. Speaker. Yeah? I got Mr. Speaker.
Member for Soufrière Fossajac, you have 15 minutes left.
15 minutes, yes, Mr. I'll try to do that. Since the duties on imports are calculated on the CIF value of goods, that is the summation of cost, insurance, and freight, Mr. Speaker, imports are subject to the higher payments of duties on imported goods, which translate to higher prices to consumers. Mr. Speaker, allowing importers to pay the pre-COVID shipping cost is a possible measure that the ministry is exploring. This second option, Mr. Speaker, will cost the government an estimated $9.2 million. And so we are exploring a third option where we may use the same use of the shipping costs, but instead of putting all items in, we are going to put some items such as food and lumber, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, rising price of flour and sugar. Over the last months, the government has been faced with challenges of rising prices of rice, flour, and sugar, Mr. Speaker. The CIF price of a bag of rice has increased significantly, by over 15%, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the same exists for sugar. There has been an average increase of 41% in the contract price for brown sugar and 75% increase, Mr. Speaker, for refined sugar. Mr. Speaker, this current government has to date absorbed the increases and continue to offer these basic commodities at the same price to our people, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, review of subsidy to our bakers. Mr. Speaker, with the ongoing crisis, the government's purchase price of wheat flour or white flour, which is currently at $99 per bag, is expected to increase by June. Given the impending increase in the price of flour, the Ministry of Commerce, in collaboration with the Ministry of Finance, is at an advanced stage of consultation with the bakers to agree on a strategy which is mutually beneficial to all parties, especially our consumers. Mr. Speaker, the current subsidy on a 100-pound bag of flour is $14 per bag at the current price, as we sell at $85, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, you need to compare this with what is happening in the region. The price of flour in Grenada is $154 a bag. The price of flour in St. Vincent, $120 a bag. In St. Kitts, $150 a bag. In Dominica, $158 a bag. Mr. Speaker, our government still holds the flour at $85, Mr. Speaker. This is a government that is putting St. Lucia first. We need to articulate that so that the average mother, when they go to the bakery, must understand that this government is helping them put food on the table, Mr. Speaker. This is important, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, so far, this subsidy is costing this government $9.8 million, Mr. Speaker. $9.8 million. And the Minister of Finance would have spoken. Even with the small gas tank, the subsidy is almost $20 on the 22-pound gas tank, Mr. Speaker. This government continues to support, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, so I will move from price increases and speak about consumer protection, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we need to provide reprieve to our consumers to reduce prices, and we are doing this. We have earlier on passed the Consumer Protection Act, Mr. Speaker. This is the moment for consumers to understand what this government is doing on its behalf, and this is the moment for consumers to stand up in solidarity with each other and to be members of the National Consumers Association. Consumers, this is your moment. Mr. Speaker, on the cooperatives, Mr. Speaker, I've mentioned the work that we are doing, but I want to take this moment to thank the credit union and to recognize their contribution, Mr. Speaker, to the development of our country. I've had conversation with the Credit Union League, and their concern is they want to have a voice in terms of the draft bill before us. And Mr. Speaker, I've met with them, and we have agreed that they would have an extra 3 months to make their contribution to that bill, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as it relates to some of the other work that is happening within the ministry, I want to mention the work of the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards, because it is important in terms of how we move forward to take care of improving the business community and our economy. No matter what support we give to the business community, they themselves need to understand that they need to operate within international standards. And that is where the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards comes in, Mr. Speaker. And I want to take this moment to advise and to encourage every small business owner to walk into the doors of the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards so that we can help them grow their business. Mr. Speaker, we have another agency that is hard at work, and that is Export St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. And the work that Export St. Lucia is doing is remarkable in terms of assisting small businesses with their marketing, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you may recall, and we know the naysayers, a lot of complaints while we attended the last World Expo at Dubai, Mr. Speaker. But the net result, Mr. Speaker, our St. Lucian products is now on the shelves in Dubai, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Export St. Lucia, one of the major projects I want to speak on is the project on e-commerce, Mr. Speaker. And we all know that the world has embraced e-commerce, and right now I know Export St. Lucia is working hard to try to get our products on eBay, Mr. Speaker. So I want to take this moment to encourage the executive director and to thank her and the board for the work that they're doing in helping small business reach markets. They've had significant success in terms of working with the CMOS farmers, Mr. Speaker. They have worked with the Swazel craft and have been successful in getting this craft on the U.S. market, Mr. Speaker. So I want to thank them. Mr. Speaker, our work on cannabis continues. I have continued to bring the public up to date, but I want here to say we are at advanced stage in terms of working on the cannabis framework and the draft legislation. And my Prime Minister has advised and encouraged me to visit another OECS country so that we can see what is happening there as we work towards ensuring that this cannabis industry, as we work together, Mr. Speaker, to bring this new baby to birth, I am pleased at the progress that we are making, and I want to thank the members of the Rastafarian movement for their support and their contribution as they sit around the table to make this a reality. Mr. Speaker, this list of measures tabled here today comes at significant cost to our government, as I've said before, and in order to be successful, this will require concerted effort and a great deal of sacrifice on the part of all stakeholders, including the public and private sector.
Remember, you have 5 minutes left.
Thank you. And wider society. In times of crisis, it is those who are able to work together and sacrifice together that will not only overcome the obstacles, but will flourish in its wake. It is my deepest resolve and my government resolve that St. Lucia will steer its way past the current challenges and in so doing lay the foundation for the prosperity of this generation and future generation. Mr. Speaker, I want to say to the business community in particular that divided we can do nothing, but united there is nothing we cannot do. Together we must banish darkness with light. My ministry remains committed to serving you, to listening to you and to working with you to ensure that every business in St. Lucia not only grows but thrives. To the members on the opposite side, this is your moment to join the government in putting St. Lucia first. Now is the moment. Now is our moment. May God give us the strength and courage to seize this moment. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Leader of Government Business and member for Castries South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the House be suspended until 2 p.m.
Honourable members, the question is that the House do stand suspended until 2 p.m. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Suspended until 2 p.m.
Well, as you've just heard, the House has been suspended until 2 p.m. this afternoon. Speaking this morning was the member for Castries South East, the Honourable Joachim Henry, the member for Gros-Islet, the Honourable Kenson Casimé, and the member for Soufrière, Fort Saint-Jacques, and Bouton, who just wrapped up, the Honourable Emma Hippolyte. But prior to the opening this morning, before the first speaker, who was Joachim Henry, we heard from the leader of government business, who informed the House that he was still in negotiation with the leader of the opposition, who is still insisting that he speaks at number 15, just before the Prime Minister wraps up. The government, or leader of government business, the Honourable Ernest Hilaire, has called on the Speaker to use his good offices to try to persuade the leader of the opposition to go along with what has been the convention of this House. Even those who are now incarcerated at the Bordelais Correctional Facility have behaved honorably and taken the right positions when speaking in debates in this honorable House. We'll wait and see what happens if the leader of the opposition will continue to insist on having his way or no way at all. We'll be back at 2 o'clock this afternoon when the debate on the Appropriations Bill presented by Finance Minister Philip J. Pierre on Tuesday will continue. Until then, it's goodbye from the St. Lucia House of Assembly. We'll be back at 2.